Welcome back to Surviving and Thriving, the Breaking Badass podcast. I am your host, Bridget, and I am so glad that you are here. Let's get started. Today's episode, we're going to be switching it up a bit and talking about the impact of family court on my life. We're going to delve into the history and complexities of the family court system. And in order to do that, we're going to be exploring its origins, the controversial concept of parental alienation syndrome, often referred to as PAS, which was introduced by Dr. Richard Gardner, and the Father's Rights movement. These elements significantly shaped my life from early childhood into my teenage years. And it didn't only impact my life, but it has impacted hundreds of thousands of others. Many children are now coming back as young adults and seeing how their life has been impacted. So let's talk about family court and its history. Family courts were created to address legal issues related to family relationships. This would include anything from divorce, child custody, and child support. And the family court system was set up to aim towards providing a specialized and sensitive environment for often very contentious matters because they're emotionally charged situations. Going back in history, the first juvenile court in the U.S. was established in Chicago in 1899 and later expanded to cover broader family issues throughout our country. Now, Richard Gardner and parental alienation syndrome comes into play much later. So let's fast forward and let's jump all the way to the mid-1980s. For context, I was born in 1985. Dr. Richard Gardner introduced parental alienation syndrome in the mid-1980s, and he described it as a disorder in which one parent manipulates a child to unjustifiably reject the other parent, primarily in custody disputes. So this is when two parents are separating, have been divorced, and he indicates that there is no other reason as to why a child would reject wanting to be or see or spend time with the other parent other than one parent that the child prefers to spend their time with is manipulating their form of thinking to reject the opposed parent. I know, it's absolutely insane. It's ridiculous. So although he had influence back in the time, Gardner's theories were quite controversial, largely because he lacked any real empirical support, and there's a potential misuse of his theories because it was discrediting any claims of abuse, and it was often putting mothers in a position of large disadvantage. Now, let's examine the Father's Rights movement, shall we? The Father's Rights movement came to be in the 1960s, 1970s, and it was advocating for equal parenting rights. And this was around the same time as a lot of the civil rights movements, where many people were arguing for equal rights. And the fathers' rights movements was also challenging these perceived biases in family courts because it was believed that they favored mothers. How many of you have heard that even still today, people claim that family courts favor mothers? That is not the case. That is factually incorrect. So activists in the fathers' rights movement, they were seeking reform. They were actively seeking out joint custody, fair child support calculations. And by fair, I mean they were seeking to have a large reduction and the elimination of any systematic biases against fathers. And we wonder why things are the way they are today. Well, at some point, there is a merger of Dr. Gardner's work and the fathers' rights movement. And that's when we have almost like a nuclear fucking bomb. Okay, so Gardner's parental alienation syndrome, his concept resonated with many individuals and advocates within fathers' rights movement who were arguing that it highlighted the unjust alienation behaviors by mothers and bolstering their push for equal custody rights. They were hanging on to this for dear life. However, PAS's application in courts remains highly contentious, with supporters claiming that it protects alienated parents and critics arguing that it was undermining legitimate abuse concerns. Recently, we have seen, modern day, coming back to like more 2024, there's been a slight shift towards this balancing approach in custody arrangements. It doesn't happen everywhere, and there are some states that are better than others. And some of these approaches, are looking towards prioritizing a child's best interests, allowing children to have a voice, providing them with a child's advocate attorney, and they're considering even both parents' involvement and addressing abuse concerns cautiously. So some jurisdictions move towards more equitable custody arrangements, and they're more cautious with these, wild concepts such as parental alienation syndrome without having any robust evidence. Now, I cannot say that that happens everywhere because still in many places, in many jurisdictions, depending on the judges, individuals are still healthy parents and mothers are accused of parental alienation syndrome. Okay, so from what I remember as a little girl, I remember that I was taken away from my mom to live with my dad. And my dad painted it in a way that I was conditioned to believe that I picked living with my dad over my mom. And this was so very confusing as I was 5 years old at the time. And I carried around a lot of guilt for my entire life, thinking that I devastated my mother. And I wanted to always go back to her to live, and I never, ever could. So fast forward to about 4 years ago. And this was the last time that I ever spoke to my father or saw him in person. He recently passed away, February of this year, on his 70th birthday, in fact. And the last time I spoke to my dad, nearly again 4 years ago, I asked him if he could clarify to me something that had happened when I was a child and why he took and kept me from my mom. He proceeded to gaslight me at that point, He did tell me that there was a gal, a guardian ad litem, who spoke to both sets of grandparents, and all of them supported him having sole custody, except my maternal grandmother. And this seemed so absurd and odd to me. I asked him to show me proof. And you know what he said? He said that it wasn't necessary at all. All I had to do was ask other family members. They would corroborate his story. Of course they would, because he told them the same information. I am not that naive. At one point, I spoke with my grandmother, my dad's mom, and she said that my older brother shared with her at one point that my mother was physically abusive to our little brother. Now, I do recall my little brother was difficult with our mom, and he is 2 years younger than me. And at times, he was aggressive. And this led my mom to getting frustrated and breaking down. And she had needed to restrain him from physically harming my mom. But she was not abusive. She never spanked us from what I can recall. So I don't know when or how or where my older brother would have said such a thing. That is not my recollection. And well, Dad, on the other hand, well, that was never a question when it came to spanking us. Not only him, but his wife, our stepmother, was quite unkind and abusive towards all three of us. I remember her making us feel like we were always bad kids. I can go into so many stories from those terrible moments of my childhood. The time where she had us picking up trash along the highway like we were prisoners. Or the time where she made my older brother drink water, dirty water from the cooler, because he hadn't completely emptied it out. And that was his punishment. Or we had to scrub the pool deck on our hands and knees with bleach water, and the bleach would eat away the skin on our knees. I mean, I can go on and on. I think probably one of the worst things was cleaning out the mulch area, getting out all the leaves. But if we had any mulch in our bag, it would be dumped out on the sidewalk, and we would have to pick out all the mulch. Yeah, that was my childhood. Just a few memories. I know I told my teachers and neighbors of how we would be spanked. We would be forced to pull our pants down, touch our toes, and we would be spanked with a wooden paddle until it broke, a plastic paddle until it broke, a belt, many objects actually. I can't remember them all. But the fact that she made us pull our pants down and touch our toes and spank us repeatedly was mortifying. I told my teachers and trusted neighbors, people I loved and I adored, and I went to their house as much as I could. I told them what was happening. I trusted them all. Me sharing with them these tales, these stories, resulted in CPS being called numerous times. I'd also told my mom, I remember this was back in the days of payphones, and I would call collect because I had to walk to school and it was almost 2 miles. And heaven forbid I would accept a ride from a friend or a friend's mom or even a teacher, because my stepmom would drive past to make sure that she still saw me walking or I'd be punished. But I would tell my mom what was going on. She would call CPS. I swear I was so intimidated and scared of my stepmom. And CPS would always go to my house. You see, I lived in Florida at the time, and my mom lived in Colorado. There was no other house that I was going to. There was no other safe space. And CPS, the social worker, never, ever went to school to speak to me. Had they, maybe my story would have turned out differently. But the social worker would come, and each time I remember they would take us out onto our screened back patio. There was a window on that patio, and it was connected to our kitchen. And our stepmother conveniently always was in the kitchen. And the social worker never said anything. I remember telling the worker one time that she was right there, and I was scared. Nothing changed. At one point, my stepmom, after a meeting with the social worker, asked me if I said anything bad to CPS. And that woman would watch me from the window, from an angle where the social worker would not see, while I was talking to the social worker outdoors. I swore that she could read my lips. So I lied to the social worker, and I said that everything was fine, that I was, being punished in accordance with not minding. I wished a million times that I could go back and have saved myself back then. Those nights after the social worker left, I would often cry myself to sleep for being a coward. I learned to dissociate and dream of a better place and a better life. So, dissociating and dreaming of a better place and a better life and surviving was my coping mechanism. So now, the age that I am, I have this mission of going back to Denver, Colorado, and seeking out the family court archives to see what truly happened in family court between my parents and the gal. Both of my parents are now deceased, and I only have one surviving grandparent. But I will obtain my truth this year, and I will finish sharing it when I do. So stick around. Keep following along as I continue to share my personal journey and insights on all of these topics, shedding light on how family court has shaped not only my life, but the lives of so many others. I'm so glad that you joined me today as I shared another part of my journey with you. Thank you for being here and for providing safe space. You can contact me via email at breakingbadasscoaching@gmail.com or find me on social media. I am lovingly called Coach Bridget B. Take care. Love and light to you all. Until next time, be well.